Hi, this is Paul Heinz with Goldberg Heinz Business Advisors, and you're watching Heinze-Sight. Heinze-Sight brings to the business owner, the business manager, new things, information, discoveries, things to be careful of, and things to celebrate. We're very, very proud to have Steve Lorenzini with us today, and he is Senior Vice President of the Daniel and Henry Company. Daniel and Henry, known in Chicago, and they're located in other places. And Daniel and Henry Company, with Steve's presence, covers every aspect of insurance that you can imagine. And with times changing, it's very logical that things have changed in the insurance industry as well. So let's ask him. Steve, welcome to our show. Please tell us what's new in the insurance business.
Well, first off, thank you. Thank you for having me. Um, I think the one thing that's changing the most, what we see in manufacturing, is the level of automation that we see in the industry. For the most part, I mean, we still get workers' comp claims, but if anybody's been paying attention, workers' comp's rates have been dropping substantially, where healthcare costs have been increasing substantially. And what we're seeing is just a lower level of machinery related claims, machinery incidents. We do still see material handling type of claims taking place, but really the level of automation that's coming into the industry from robotics, from the type of equipment and machinery that's being used, it's really taking away the injury to the employee. And so the concern really comes is what does that then open, and what happens when you start going in that direction of automation, and you start to all of a sudden start opening a door into risks of like cyber liability, and how is that being properly taken care of. You could run into risks from a professional liability standpoint, meaning that because you're using so much automation, the parts may not be completely to specifications of what's being designed, and those things could lead to a professional liability claim. Which, of course, what professional is everybody knows general liability, and that creates damage from either the premises or operations, or a product or completed operations, and it's got to be bodily injury or property damage. A professional liability is when a part is made out of spec. It's the size, the shape, the material is wrong. And so you have what we call an impaired property. The general liability would not respond to those type of claims. So you would need to have a professional liability policy in place, or other people that have a direct product, you could have a product recall policy in place. But that's become, basically for especially component part manufacturers, making sure you have appropriate professional liability and that's written properly for you.
Let's roll back for a moment, Steve. With automation coming in and affecting the manufacturing processes in plants, would there be a logical reduction or a slowdown in the rates for workmen's compensation protection and a corresponding increase in uh, plant machinery and operation insurances? Where would the advantage be to the owner being robotically oriented and getting more and more devices to operate? Uh, where does the cost of automation come into play for the business owner?
So what we see is a lot of business owners are finding problems with help, making sure they get good
Yes.
employees, trained employees. That's been so increasing the level of automation actually helps with that the employment issue that people are seeing. So we're seeing a lot more people move to robotics through like lights out production. They're doing different things that they're able to continually manufacture product without having somebody sitting at the machine all the time. And so what that does is that it creates the a kind of an opening on the other side, because one of the things that we talked about it briefly was cyber liability. But oftentimes when you see a cyber claim, and let's say you get a hacker that comes in and they put encryptions through the system, some manufacturer or some businesses, most businesses are going to have an administrative issue that takes place, that they can't access their computers and so on. Manufacturers that are highly automated, they wind up going right to the production side, and their operations are shut down until they can figure out how that's going to happen. And so the financial impact to a manufacturer is so much more severe. And so what we talk to them about is, first off, making sure that you have the appropriate insurance in place, but also make sure you have the protective safeguards in place that is going to prevent this from happening in the first place. And once you do that, and you make sure that you have what they call multi-factor authentication, meaning if you got outside people coming into your system, they have to get an access code in order to get in. People do it with their banks all the time now, but they should have that in the company side. And it's basically protecting that occurrence from taking place and protecting that system.
Most insurance coverages in manufacturing are in various different categories. In my experience, and I know many of my colleagues in manufacturing, seldom, if ever, read the fine print.
Mm-hmm.
That's not uncommon to you, I'm sure.
No, what we see is we see the business owner understanding the manufacturing business, um, very well, obviously. And then we see the insurance people understanding the insurance business very well. But sometimes they cross. There's not, what we call that a coverage gap, that the business is operating in a fashion or having some sort of opening that the agent is not aware of, it doesn't even know that could exist. And then all of a sudden there's a problem, and then it's an uninsured type of loss. So when you run into those things, the best thing, I mentioned before with you that, we always do an inspection. We always talk through the type of operations, how they're doing business, different vendors that they're using, all those things, because it could be creating a gap somewhere along the line.
Our viewers should look at the website, which is danielandhenry.com. And if you want to see a complex, thorough listing of insurance offerings, take a look at their website. It's just an amazing listing of exposures that are handled by Daniel and Henry. Now, as far as new coverages, the coverages having to do with cyber interference and so forth and so on, are there any differences in patent protection? Any differences in you mentioned completed operations, or the old school of product liability? Where are some of those things heading, or have they gone away?
Well, one of the things that's really adversely affecting the industry right now is the property market. So property insurance in general has gone up substantially.
Okay.
People can see that in just their homeowners premiums, but in commercial, which is manufacturing, we're seeing it that adversely affect that industry also. And it's basically the weather related claims that are taking place, and everyone always blamed the two coasts, with the hurricanes and the mudslides and all those things. But if you look at the data, there is a great number of claims that are happening in the Midwest with, wind, hail, tornadoes, things in that nature. And it's really adversely affecting the property market. So we're seeing it, like you're seeing deductibles go up substantially. You're seeing rates go up substantially. There's a lot more restrictions, especially for roof related claims that are coming into play. So that whole industry is starting to change. And unless something happens with these weather patterns and changing those, we don't see an end in sight with that.
In covering business owners and business owner families, what are some of the usual businesses classifications that you handle? Manufacturing, certainly, there's no question about that. What other business enterprises do you insure?
Our firm works in pretty much all different industries. personally, I do the vast majority of my business in the manufacturing field.
Okay.
I'm endorsed by a local association here, have been for the last 13 years. And from that, we've seen and worked with a lot of different manufacturers and all different type of processes. So we've been very well versed in what the exposures are, questions to ask, areas to look at in order to make sure that we uncover all those things so there's no surprises, no coverage gaps along the way.
What about the conduct of employees, the electronic transfer of small amounts as well as large amounts of money?
Yes,
Happens frequently, daily, maybe
yes,
hourly.
yes.
What happens there?
So there's some serious concerns with that, and all of it goes down to having the proper protocols in place to protect against it. But one of the things that we've seen a substantial uptick in is what's called social engineering. And it's kind of a terrible name. We've heard it called cyber deception also. But what it is basically tricking people out of releasing funds. And it could be sending an email and just basically pirating that email, somehow getting it in there and sending similar information and convincing the person to release funds back to the bad actors. And so we've seen that repeatedly over the last few years. There's certain things you can do. A real simple thing is just to, if anything changes with your payments, is to pick up the phone and call somebody and to kind of work through, hey, did you send this to me? Let's read through it. Let me make sure we have it accurate. And so it kind of prevents it from happening. But they're very good about lulling people into that false sense of security. And, their timing on it they're very, very professional, put it that way.
Undoubtedly, in your 35 years at the helm at the Daniel and Henry Company here in Chicago, you've seen first generation, second generation, possibly third generation. The wisdom of the first generation in transferring over to the second, and all of the complexities in insurance coverages. I know for a fact that you work with generational transitions and
Mm-hmm.
the explanation, the education, and the awareness of things that are changing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you run across as many second and third generation companies as you did, say, 20 years ago?
You know, there are still quite a few companies that we work with. I would say the majority of them are multi-generational companies. And it's interesting because a lot of people look at the manufacturing business, and if you say 20 years ago, the processes and what they've done and how they're doing it, the level of automation and the level of change that's gone through has been remarkable. The robotics, I mean, all of those type of things have just transformed the industry. But they tend to look at insurance as though it's stagnant, as though the insurance industry is the same thing that they bought 20 years ago, and it's the same program and the same policies. That's not the way things work now. I mean, with all this automation and all these changes, it's opening doors. Like you just mentioned, the social engineering thing. We never saw social engineering for years, right? And now we see it every other day, it seems like. And so it's kind of keeping up on it, not only from making sure your insurance policies are in place, but making sure the best practices are in place to prevent a claim from actually occurring. And so those two things are very, very important.
Let's talk about best practices for a moment. From generation to generation, or just in the daily life of the business owner or owner partnerships. When the insurance premiums are due at the anniversary of the coverage, they come in and the office manager processes them. They become an accounts payable and they come through because customarily the insurance brokerage firm has been there a long time and so forth. As
Mm-hmm.
far as the awareness of changes, isn't it a good idea for the owner to mark their calendars and review the policies with you beforehand? Or are you doing that for the business owner, alerting them? What do you prefer to have happen?
So Yeah, so most of our clients, because there is a lot of changes that take place throughout the year, we check in with them throughout the year, but usually 90 days before the renewal, we'll have a pre-renewal meeting in which we will kind of go through the exposures, go through what's changing in the business, new opportunities they may have, challenges they may face, things in that nature, and kind of working through just getting to see what's happening within the company. Then we kind of figure out a strategy of how we're going to move forward. And when we figure out, like, is this a year that we think we should remarket the program? Because the market's changing all the time. The insurance industry is changing right now. Property rates are incredibly high and keep going higher, where workers' compensation rates are fairly low, and that they seem to be constantly being pushed lower. So it's where the market's at any given time. You want to make sure that you're representing that marketplace. So we wind up determining, do we think this carrier is out of line? A good example is that we had some severe claims several years ago. We've corrected ourselves. Are we getting the appropriate credit from our current provider, or should we go look at another provider to get some competition to get a better premium overall? Then, of course, the architect and putting together the programs, that's really where we come into play to make sure that that we speak the insurance language, we understand the manufacturing industry. So when we communicate, we do tours and we look at exposures, we make sure that there's no coverage gaps along the way.
Few people would argue, Steve, that we're in a world economy. Globally, we operate, even the smallest of businesses has an opportunity and an occasion to reach out and do some international business.
Mm-hmm.
What should they be aware of in doing international business? Imagine for a moment you're doing a project for someone in manufacturing and you have shipped it and it's on its way. And
Mm-hmm.
then you send the invoice
Mm-hmm.
and you watch the calendar and you wait for the payment due date to come so that you're paid. Obviously, most people today take precautions in
Mm-hmm.
making sure that deposits are in place. What are some of the other things that you would tell a business owner that is taking the leap toward expansion overseas?
So there's a couple different areas. The one that comes to mind is often the ocean cargo. And when you're shipping the product, a lot of manufacturers like it to say FOB my dock, and so it's their customer's problem as soon as it leaves the dock. The problem with that is that the customers are never happy when it doesn't make it to their dock. And so, especially in an ocean situation. So if my clients oftentimes take responsibility for the actual shipment, and then we control the insurance. So we're not using a freight forwarder. We buy an ocean cargo policy to make sure that we control the claim. We control. So God forbid something happens where the material is either lost or stolen or damaged in some way, that our policy is going to respond and we're going to control the payment on that situation. And usually ocean cargo insurance is very reasonable. It's not not very expensive, and it cuts out a lot of headaches along the way. Then after that, if the insurance company wants to subrogate or go back against the responsible parties, that's great. But at least we got compensated, and we're clean on it. The other thing we run into is obviously the foreign liability, the repatriation. If you're sending people overseas, you're responsible for them on a 24-hour basis, even if they get sick, and you have to bring them back to the United States. All that cost would be picked up in a repatriation expense, which can be very expensive. So you want to make sure that those foreign exposures are taken care of. And then we deal with companies that have exposures all over the world. That's not uncommon these days, and to make sure that if we need to do a worldwide product coverage, we can provide that. So it's just understanding what the operation is and making sure the policies represent what that operation it truly is.
Let's look local for a moment. The day-to-day business operation of just an average business that's not overseas, and suddenly and regrettably, they have a fire.
Mm-hmm.
We all know that building contents and those immediate things are covered by most people. They certainly are aware of the need for that. What about business interruption insurance? Where is
Mhm.
that today? When your
Well,
business is shut down because of fire?
yes. So, that is probably the one area that we see people not properly covered, that there's usually, we talk about that coverage gap. This one's not a full blown coverage gap. It's more of a diminished value that's being allocated in that particular coverage line. Essentially, what we're protecting is the income statement, right? And when we look at the income statement, you're going to have all of your expenses coming through for the company. And really what our job is to look at it and say, okay, what are going to be the discontinuing expenses? Material is going to be a discontinuing expenses. Suppliers are going to be a discontinuing expense. Certain areas in that area, transportation is going to be a discontinued expense. But all the other things are going to keep going. And with the nature of the employees right now and finding quality employees, if you're going to be out for a certain period of time, you want to make sure that you keep your employees intact, because when you come back, you're going to want them. And so it's going through that process of evaluating the financials to come up with a good number. And the other thing to be considered when you're thinking about that is, how long will it take you to get the machinery and your equipment back? I mean, most people look at 12 months and they think, well, that's it. But then they look at lead time on a new piece of equipment, and it may be much longer than 12 months. So is 12 months an adequate figure to ensure my entire operation, going up in smoke? I mean, that's something to consider, is not just the dollar amount, but the time frame with that dollar amount that you need to make sure it's accurate.
Good. As far as transportation, as far as other services are concerned, most transportation companies have adequate insurance and that's covered. What about the employee that oftentimes is now considered to be a contract employee? How do you handle an employee as a contract employee with your client, customer, the manufacturer?
Mm-hmm. So when we look at a contract employee, this would be somebody that is, not, a W-2 employee that you guys are 1099, or it has is through a temp service or something in that nature. Really, the intent is that, like with any contractor or anybody, any vendor that comes in to do work for you, you have to make sure that they're properly protecting you and providing the appropriate insurance, that God forbid they do something on your behalf,
Yes.
that you are properly protected for those things. And so there's a couple different areas to be really cautious of. If you think about like temp services, a lot of people use temp services, but really what you have with the temp service is a bunch of third party people walking around your facility and using your equipment. And so, God forbid they get injured severely on some of your equipment. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to run into an issue. Now, the temp service is going to have workers' compensation, but there's an issue regarding what's called employer's liability, which, was the machinery properly guarded? Were they trained appropriately? Was there proper supervision? Those type of things are going to come into play. And oftentimes, the employee or the temp service employee will go after the machinery people. The machinery people then would action over and come after the manufacturer. You just have to make sure you have the right forms in place to protect from those things taking place. Yeah, they are third party people. They are. You got to look at it. It's like the general public walking in your manufacturing facility, working on your equipment.
For the business owner, manager watching, is probably a really good idea to visit the Daniel Henry website and look at the coverage definitions that they handle. But in addition to that, Steve is on the executive committee of Daniel Henry. He's on the board of directors of the Daniel Henry Company. Talk to Steve. And how could our viewers best get in touch with you or people in your office?
To get in touch with me, the best way is to just call my cell phone. And that number is 312 343 2628. And, or you can text me, one or the other. I will be more than happy to respond to any phone calls or texts.
DanielHenry.com. Is there any other closing statement, any other comment that you'd like to impart on a viewer as far as the broad area of insurance? Any words of wisdom that you use frequently?
I think when you look at and evaluate the overall insurance plans, I think it's always good to find someone who specializes in that field that understands it. You and I briefly talked about my dad and the history we had in manufacturing. So my dad was a general manager of a tool and die shop, and summers I would work there, summer helper and stuff. But really, this was a job shop that had a lot of different functions and things that they could do. And even though I was not technically proficient to really do any of those functions except lift things and move things around, I was able to rely on him to understand what those operations are and what those processes are. So I understood what the insurance exposures were and the best way that we would be able to approach them and handle them. And sometimes buying insurance is the best way, but like we talked about with the cyber, for example, it may not be just buying the insurance. It may be putting protective safeguards in place in order to make sure that you're not going to really need the insurance and you have the insurance truly as a backstop.
Right. Consider Daniel Henry a resource. Things are complicated these days, and they're not going to get any more uncomplicated. If you want the support of an experienced firm, give Steve a call. Thank you for the opportunity to visit with us today. And if you have any questions of Steve, call him, or if we can be of any service to you here, give us a call. Thanks for listening. Steve, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you the next time. Bye for now.